Just for the record, I hate crying. I know that we've touched a lot of sore spots over the course of this series. And as we talk today about grief and loss, don't be afraid to just hang with me there for a second, because Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And I think that you'll find on the backside of what our talk today is about, that you'll find blessing. You know, and when I was growing up, crying was never something that boys should do. I think it came a lot from my dad, which I really never saw him cry. I mean, I think it came from an emotional scratch on his record. When he was 16, his dad died, and he became the man of the house. And instantly, when all the rest of his family was falling apart, he was the one that had to make all the tough decisions, make things happen. And I think that because of that, it caused him to not be super expressive with his emotions. In fact, you know, he would go to movies that, you know, we'd all be together, and it would be super emotional part, you know. And you knew my dad was getting emotional when he would do this. That was it. That was as emotional as he got. All the way up until the point, until Mom died. And I saw my dad cry for the very first time. And when he did, he apologized for it and then left the room. And I know that when we're talking about the ways that we are used to expressing grief and loss, that was the way I grew up. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't, obviously, he didn't feel like it was okay for him to cry because he's a guy, right? Now, women could cry, that was fine. But, you know, it's weird how families, I don't know if your family's like this, but mine definitely was, that, you know, certain emotions are okay and certain ones aren't. Like, it was okay for girls to cry, but it was not okay for girls to get angry, because then they got called the B word. You know what I'm saying? But it was okay for guys to get angry. My dad had no problem at all expressing his anger, but it wasn't okay for guys to cry, because then they get called another B word, a baby, right? And the funny thing about babies is that as infants, you never really have to wonder what an infant is feeling. They will just tell you, and usually at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And as they grow older and they hit their twos, you never have to wonder if a 2-year-old is being duplicitous, or if there's a hidden agenda with the way the 2-year-olds think. You know, when they feel something, they will just tell you. They don't like something, they will tell you. That's not a problem. But for some reason, as we grow older, we begin to learn which types of emotions are acceptable and which ones aren't. And we learn to protect ourselves from expressing certain emotions so that we don't get judged. And over time, I think our emotions turn from expressed emotions to repressed emotions to depressed emotions because of the way that we grow up. And I think that while some of those protection mechanisms are helpful, to not get judged and all of those things, one of the things that is an unfortunate side effect of those protection mechanisms is that it not only keeps us from feeling that sense of loss and rejection, it also keeps us from feeling love. And we've been talking about first love and the breakthroughs that we need to have first love. And the big idea of today is that we all need a breakthrough. All of us do. There needs to be a space for grief among us, because we all need this. And breakthroughs happen when we allow Jesus to remove the barriers that block our experience of first love. Now, the breakthroughs, they happen in lots of different ways. Most people who consider themselves to be far from God, they will normally point to a moment in time when there was a moment of grief and loss. And because of that grief and loss, they have decided that God either no longer exists or doesn't care. And this is the breakthrough that I think a lot of us need. And it's not just the loss of a loved one. I'm talking about all kinds of different loss here that all needs to be grieved, because in every change there is loss, and every loss longs to be grieved. Our lives are in a state of impermanence, and there's all kinds of loss that we feel and different degrees of loss that we feel because of the different types of changes and the different types of loss that come with it, because every change includes loss. Every loss longs to be grieved. Now, we're talking about all different degrees of change here that happen, and they can be actually good things, like getting married. That's a good thing, right? I mean, I don't know of a couple that gets married in a wedding that's like mad about it, or, they're upset about it. I mean, they're happy, right? But the truth of the matter is that there is a sense of loss that comes with marriage. I mean, you're not going to be able to date everybody anymore, right? You've just lost the simplicity of decision making, Because when you get married, all that just goes out the window, right? And there's other types of change that's good too. I mean, having kids. That's a good thing, right? People are generally happy when they have a baby, right? But you're going to lose a ton of sleep, right? That is a huge loss. And the grind of the sleep deprivation will just wear you down. And there's other types of changes that, we cause too that are good. Like, you get a new job, get a bump in pay. All those things are good. But there is with it, especially if there's a move involved, a sense of loss with that change because, you just inherited a whole other mess. And you have to leave all of those relationships that you had in the past with the other job. And now if you're moving, you have to pull up a GPS every time you want to go to the grocery store, or just random things like that. There's all degrees of loss, right? Now, all of those things that we choose is fine, and they're all good, but what about the ones that we don't choose? And there still can be changes that are good that we don't choose. I mean, kids grow up. That's a good thing, right? But when you're dropping a kid off for their first time at kindergarten or their first time at college, we would never ask that to not be the case, right? We want our kids to grow up. But at the same time, there is that real sense of loss that is there. You're not going to be spending as much time with your kids as you were before. And there is that sense of loss. And not even to mention the times when there are changes that happen that we don't want to have happen. Like our bodies get older and fatter and balder. Right? Nobody wants that, right? And it longs to be grieved. It is a sense of loss. And I don't even have to mention the other types of loss, like when, a spouse decides that they don't love you anymore and they give the ring back. There's got a lot of loss in something like that. It's the loss of money, loss of love, relationships, custody of the kid, all kinds of stuff gets balled up into that sense of loss. And it longs to be grieved. So obviously we're talking about the loss of a loved one and that degree of change, that degree of loss. But we're talking about all kinds of changes, all kinds of loss, and yes, all kinds of grief. Every change includes loss. Every loss longs to be grieved. And what our tendency is that we, for whatever reason, when we feel that sense of loss, we want to go back and undo the change. But the only problem is that you can't go back into the past. And what you end up doing is just creating more change. And you're compounding the sense of loss. We think, I'll just get another kid. I'll get another spouse. I'll get another job. But that's just more change. And you're just putting off the compounding loss that you will feel someday that longs to be grieved. The worst thing that you can do when you find yourself in the dark night of the soul is to chase the sunset. The best thing that you can do is turn around, face the darkness, walk into the night. And if you don't have the strength to do that, just stand there. Let the night pass over you because the sun will come up. Ecclesiastes puts it really well, and it says, crying is better than laughing. It blotches the face, but it scours the heart. Sages invest themselves in hurt and grieving. Fools waste their time in fun and games. You know, when I was 12 years old, my mom decided that she was going to give me a lesson in grieving. So when I was 12, she took me to my great-grandpa Strom's funeral, first funeral I'd ever been to. Took a 5-hour drive past Worlds of Fun into Sabetha, Kansas, and I was shocked with everything that was happening. I mean, just the shock of seeing Grandpa Strom in a box was kind of weird. And then the way the people responded, I mean, some people were crying and some people were laughing and some people were just catching up with old friends and family. And none of it made sense to me. And my mom, she saw some friends that she wanted to catch up with. And so she sat me down and she said, Jason, just sit here, be a good boy. Well, you know, when you tell Jason after there reaches a certain threshold of boredom, that's a dangerous spot, you know. So, man, I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I just started exploring. And, you know, I smelled all the flowers. They had this book where, you know, you wrote your name in there and some memoirs of Grandpa Strom I wrote in there. You know, I was touching Grandpa Strom to see what a dead person felt like. You know, I was doing all kinds of stuff, right? And then finally, I just couldn't stand anymore. And I was just like, Mom, come on, let's go, you know? And so she was like, all right, you know, she got tired of me bugging her. She grabbed my hand, walks out the front, and then notices my penmanship, because there it was, glaring 12-year-old penmanship. Jason Carl Morris. I don't want to be here. And if we're honest, a lot of us, when we're hit with that sense of loss and grief, we respond the same way. I don't want to be here. Right? And we have lots of defenses for this. We have denial, where we'll selectively forget certain seasons of our lives, and we just won't acknowledge it. We'll say things like, oh, I feel just fine. It didn't bother me at all that my boss belittled me and that I lost my job. I'm not worried, right? Or sometimes we'll blame others. We'll project our pain on them, and we'll start these little games like woulda, coulda, shoulda games. You know, if you would have been here, if we would have done this, you know, all of those things. And sometimes we can even put that on ourselves and say, you know, clearly I'm not a lovable person, or I don't deserve love. And so we will blame ourselves. And then there's minimizing, where we'll say things like it's not that big of a deal, or we'll rationalize it and say that's just how our family handles stress, that's just the way she is, or we'll intellectualize it and say things like, well, my situation isn't as bad as some of the people that, you know, are in Africa, or some of the orphans we have in South Africa, or in Thailand, or in India. You know, it's really not that bad. Or we'll just plain old avoid the subject altogether by either changing the subject or using humor, or even becoming hostile and say things like, look, I don't want to talk about it. It's not going to fix it. It happened, and I just don't want to deal with it. And then sometimes we'll just distract ourselves, whether it be through entertainment or through food or alcohol or drugs or Netflix, or sometimes we'll even spiritualize it. And we'll spout off verses as if it changes the way we feel and say things, oh, all things work together for good, or get ourselves involved in ministry to help numb the pain. There's all different sorts of ways that we will try to avoid this because I don't want to be here. But Jesus has a different tack on it. He says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And maybe the reason why your soul doesn't feel the comfort that it longs for is because we've chosen not to mourn. And look, I'm not good at grieving, okay? Unless we're playing Minecraft, and then I'm awesome at it. And for those of you who just got that joke, we just became best friends. Yes. All right. So I am not good at this. I'm actually really good at avoiding it. But Jesus gives me permission to grieve loss. And that's one of the first breakthroughs that I realized. The Gospels intentionally record Jesus' emotions. And you see this in John 11 with the raising of Lazarus. So let's read this. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Now, scriptures don't really say why Mary hung back. My gut tells me that she was just trying to avoid the whole scenario, like many of us do. I don't want to be here. Martha, however, goes out to meet Jesus, and Martha was ticked. She said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Again, the blaming, right? "But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Jesus says to her, "Your brother will rise again." Notice Jesus, it's fascinating. Jesus doesn't judge. You find everybody judging Jesus. Jesus doesn't judge. And Martha's getting angry, right? So that must be okay because Jesus didn't, rebuke her for that. And he says, Jesus knows what's going to happen. He said, "Your brother will rise again." And then Martha says to him, "I know that he will rise again on the resurrection in the last day." So she's got her theology straight, but she doesn't feel any different. And I want to give you permission for something right now that maybe you've never thought through, but emotions aren't logical. All right? You can't logic your way out of emotions. You just feel the way you feel. And many times because emotions can't be bound by systems of logic and reason like theology, you can't theologize yourself out of emotions either. And Mary couldn't. She knew the right things. She knew the right answers, but she was still mad. And that's okay. Let's keep on reading. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And this is the big question here. And this was, I don't know if you noticed it, but the question that Leslie had in the video, where she had a choice whether she was going to continue trusting in Jesus or not, believing or not. This isn't an intellectual assent here. It is a deep-seated belief. Am I going to believe and trust? And this is what Jesus asks. And I love the response that Martha gives. She says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world." Martha's just being honest here. She doesn't know if she believes that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus or not, or that he is the resurrection. She's like, sometimes you just can't believe in what God will do, but you can at least believe in who he is. And that's what she's doing at this point. Now, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Same blame game all over again. Then Jesus saw her weeping, and all the Jews who had come with her also weeping. And he, Jesus, the one in control, the one who knew what he was going to do, was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. So here you have a guy who's in control and troubled at the same time. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And then you have one of the shortest and probably one of the most profound verses in all of Scripture. Jesus wept. Jesus knew what he was going to do. Jesus clearly had his theology right. Martha had her theology right, and yet Martha and Mary were both angry while being women, and Jesus, a man, is crying. It must be okay then. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" This is what I love about the response, is that the Jews didn't see the crying as a sign of weakness. They saw it as a sign of love. But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Again, projecting pain. But Jesus doesn't rebuke any of it. He just hurts with us. Jesus grieves with me. Isaiah 53 says, he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we didn't care. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. When you experience a Savior who cares and opens up his heart to you, yeah, he's in control, but he's willing to step down, not be aloof, but step down and grieve with you. That opens up your heart to first love. And if Jesus gives me permission to grieve and he grieves with me, then I don't have to grieve alone. And it took another culture for me to really grasp what this is like. As most of you know, I was a missionary in Paraguay for a while, and in my late 20s, I was a youth pastor. And there was this one kid, his name was Kamichi. He was one of these kids that didn't really fit in anywhere with the rest of Latino culture. He liked to rap, and he liked to break dance, and but he was a really great kid, and we spent a lot of really great time together. And what he would do, though, is that he would get with his girlfriend who had a band, and they would go out in these villages, and they'd play rock music, and he would throw down a piece of cardboard and start spinning around and doing rapping and stuff like that, draw a crowd, and then tell people about Jesus. It was awesome. And on one of these particular trips, I got a phone call, and it turned into a scenario where I was standing at the doorstep of Blanca Grajales, Kamichi's mom. And the only thing that I could think of, it was 10 o'clock at night, and I was feeling kind of guilty for having not visited her before, but she was in a rough part of town, kind of across the street from Shaney Town and government housing, single mom, 3 kids, and the only thing I could think of was, I don't want to be here. And I knocked on the door, she opened it up, and she immediately went into hospitality mode. She said, "Oh, Pastor, let me get you some coffee. You want something to drink?" And I'm like, no, this isn't going to be a fun visit. Kamichi, he was off, doing that evangelistic thing, and came back, and they had planned a picnic and by the river, and they decided to go swimming. And we don't know where Kamichi is right now. And what I expected her to just be angry with me at that point. I mean, no youth pastor wants to tell a parent, we don't know where your kid is. And she just dropped on her knees and started praying. And Latinos pray differently than Anglos do. And parents who are really concerned about their kids pray differently. And it started drawing a crowd. Neighbors started coming over, and we all started praying together, and a couple hours later, I got a phone call. They'd found Kamichi, but not in the state that we'd wanted. You see, the piranhas got him. 2 miles downstream, the only thing that was left was this sopping mass of flesh and bone. And I had to go back and tell Blanca that she was never going to see her son again. And what happened next, I really wasn't prepared for. Because nobody in seminary really teaches you how to prepare for that. She just started screaming. And the neighbors started screaming. And the wailing happened. And the whole apartment complex and the whole block started screaming. Taking his clothes out and his shoes and running around in the courtyard screaming, "Why couldn't it have been me?" And in that moment, I was trying to be the strong, silent type, the pastor who had everything together, consoling other people and trying to be strong. And so I helped carry the casket up to the church while Blanca beat her chest and said, "Why can't I see my son?" There wasn't anything to see. And I was there to console all the other kids in the youth group and do crazy things like get all the deacons together, form a perimeter around the casket so that no one could see that we were mopping up the blood underneath it that had been dripping through, putting epoxy glue on the bottom so that it wouldn't continue to do that. It was a mess, and so were they, and I was trying not to be. And after we put Kamichi in the ground, a couple days later I was in the shower, and something inside broke. I found myself on the floor in the bathroom just crying, and I couldn't stop. And sometimes breakthrough feels like just being broken in the beginning. And what I began to do was just started crying with my church. And we just cried together. And I realized that in times of grief, I don't need to excuse myself and leave the room. I don't have to grieve alone. And over the weeks, our group would get together and cry together, and then we'd say things like, let's paint Blanca's house to cheer her up, Let's all do it together as a group, and let's do it in the name of Kamichi. Let's take little Danny, the little brother. Let's take him out to lunch, the whole group, even though he's younger than us. It doesn't matter. He'll think it's cool, and let's be a family for him. Let's be the brother that he lost, and let's do it in the name of Kamichi. If that sounds familiar to you, it should. Because we here in church, we do all kinds of things in the name of Jesus. The one who died for us, the one who grieves with us. And we don't have to grieve alone. It taught me how to grieve in community. And it showed me the power and the breakthrough that can happen and the love that you can experience when you do so. And I love how Roman puts this whole idea of community when it says, be happy with those who are happy, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with each other, don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. Everybody grieves differently. Don't judge them for it. But leverage community to move through the pain of loss. What I love about this church is that this is a place where it's okay to not be okay. We've actually built structures to help people navigate these times of loss, whether it be grief share, lifelines, you heard about it in the videos. And so what I'd like is to have is our prayer partners to come as, they do this every week, but it is a symbol of what this place is. And as those guys come up here and stand in front of you, they're letting you know you don't have to grieve alone. You don't. You can step into it in community. Because the big idea for today is that Jesus gives me permission to grieve loss because he grieves with me and I don't have to grieve alone. Take advantage of this. Don't shy away from the grief, whether it be now with the prayer partners online in all of our locations or in the groups that we have set up for you for emotionally healthy spirituality in the next few weeks. Don't do it alone. Don't shy away from this time. Let's pray. Jesus, that you even listen to us, that you care, that you love us, you grieve with us, you take our pain. That's amazing. That is first love. You give us permission to grieve because you do it with us. And even though it's risky, and even though it's not intuitive, give us the strength to step into community and to mourn with those who mourn, knowing that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And may the comfort and the love that comes from you just be a sense deep down in our soul of first love and let it open up new realities of dependence, community, and first love. In Jesus' name, with that same authority, I ask as one of your children. Amen. You know, grief takes time. You can't just make it happen. And so what I love about what we're going to be talking about next week even is rhythms of rest and Sabbath that give our souls space to process some of this grief. And so don't miss next week when Dan is going to share about how to do that. But don't miss these opportunities that you have here in this space even to not be alone. Because all of us need that breakthrough. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.